Good evening and welcome to The Jury, the show where we prosecute political correctness, revive the dying art of respectful disagreement and give the average Aussie a voice in the court of public opinion. Coming up on tonight's show, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd once described Donald Trump as a destructive president. Now Trump has fired back big. With Trump on the rise, can Rudd really continue as our US ambassador? We learned 2/3 of young people are giving up on home ownership as house prices skyrocket and immigration rates squeeze them out of the market. So should young Aussies give up the dream of owning their own home? The ABC hit with more claims of bias despite its charter obligation to be impartial. A former chair of the public broadcaster tells us why we don't need the ABC. Plus, we debate pill testing and should we cull sharks. There they are, this week's jury, ready to weigh up the arguments and deliver their verdict. We'll hear from expert witnesses who are ready and willing to prosecute and defend their arguments. This courtroom is now in session. Let's get into it.
Sky News Australia presents The Jury with Danica De Giorgio.
They say what goes around comes around, and this week that proved true. Historic footage resurfaced showing former PM Kevin Rudd describing Donald Trump as a destructive president and a traitor to the West.
Trump, at present, represents a political liability for both sides of Australian politics. This guy is a problem. He is an objective problem. The Republican Party, which enabled this guy to be elected, have a deep responsibility to accept responsibility for the consequence of their actions and begin the processes for one form or another of his removal by constitutional means.
Rudd was parachuted into the role of Australia's ambassador to the US in March last year and obviously thought there would be no chance of a Trump resurgence. Yet, here we are in 2024, and that is exactly what has happened. Trump this week offered up this rebuke of Rudd.
He won't be there long if that's the case. I don't know much about him. I heard he was a little bit nasty. I hear he's not the brightest bulb. But I don't know much about him. But if he's at all hostile, he will not be there long.
That one-line comment has dominated the news agenda ever since. Albanese's personal loyalty towards Kevin Rudd that led to a highly sought-after and important diplomatic appointment looks set to blow up in his face. It could do enormous damage to the national interest too. Labor insists they are backing in Rudd. They deny any diplomatic firestorm is looming. But if Rudd stays put, could Australia have a problem if Trump is re-elected? Our question for the jury, can Kevin Rudd continue as our US ambassador? Joining us now is former press secretary to Labor Prime Minister Julia Gillard and Labor advisor Darren Barnett, plus Liberal MP Garth Hamilton. Thank you to both of you for joining us for our first panel this evening. Garth, is Rudd's position now completely untenable?
Well, of course it is. It's already over. But I want to say this very clearly. Australia decides who its ambassador is. This is something that we should decide. The Prime Minister will decide that, not a foreign government. So whilst that might sound like a defence of Kevin, it's absolutely not. What we've got to be clear about here is, unfortunately, because of Kevin's comments, because he's chasing that Guardian headline that he wanted so badly, or whatever it was that forced him to say those things back then, we are now on the back foot of every negotiation we're having. It's not about Trump. It's about the Biden administration now. We're dealing on AUKUS with Israel, what's going on in the Ukraine with China. We've got big tech deals. We've got trade deals to have with the US. And on every one of those, we are now entering on the back foot because Kevin's having to explain himself, to dig himself out of a hole. That's a hole entirely of his own digging. This is his fault. He couldn't help himself. He's got himself in this situation. And now the longer he stays, it's costing Australia.
Yeah, absolutely, Darren. I mean, do you think it's a case that Kevin Rudd probably thought that Trump would never make a resurgence like this? Would he be regretting those comments now?
I don't think he was the only one who thought it might be a no recurrence of a Trump presidency. However, I think on balance of probabilities, it does look possible, if not likely, that Trump will be the president. So, look, does he regret it? He probably does. But does it matter? I thought it was interesting that Trump's comments were guarded in the sense that he said if he is hostile, I don't think you'll see any hostility from Kevin Rudd from here on in.
You don't think so at all?
Not on this matter. It's too important a relationship. And he knows that he's there to represent the Australian people. He knows the importance of the relationship, whether it's trade, whether it's AUKUS. There's a whole bunch of reasons why the relationship between Australia and the US is getting stronger, not weaker. And Kevin is highly cognizant of that. I don't think you'll see any diplomatic waves as a result of Kevin staying in the job.
Garth, what do you think about that? I mean, are we in a diplomatic crisis or not, as Darren said? In the end, Rudd was a captain's pick who's now talked himself into strife.
Look, he was, but, we do have some breaking news. Have you heard what the US Ambassador, Caroline Kennedy, said about Peter Dutton? No, you didn't. She kept it to herself because she's a professional and she knows that's the job. You don't put yourself first, you put the nation first. This is not Kevin's first rodeo. He's experiencing his first term as an ambassador what he experienced from his Labor colleagues in his first term as Prime Minister. They see him as a liability. He's causing them problems, and I cannot believe that Mr Albanese will be wanting to carry this all the way into the next election. Let's get some juror feedback. Rob, we'll start with you. What do you think of Rudd's comments? Is his position now untenable?
Totally untenable. I think it's another perfect example of virtue signalling gone wrong. Again, the left playing the man, not the ball. He just cannot continue. And, Trump is just not going to sit back and say, oh, you dissed me here. Let's just shake hands and make up. It's not going to happen. He has to jump or be pushed. And his ego's too big to jump, so he has to be pushed. No question.
Paul in the front row, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. If you look at the previous ambassadors, with both sides of politics, Beazley or Hockey, they had great relationships. And, with the strategic environment and deteriorating, the relationship needs to be strong.
Sean, is his position now untenable?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's got form, obviously, and he kind of just doesn't think before he speaks. I think he would rather be US president.
According to, you reckon? Do you think?
Well, according to Kevin, right?
According to Kevin, yeah.
Kevin would definitely accept that position. But, I mean, you've got to be diplomatic about a lot of different stuff with the way everything is in the world, I think. So, but, yeah, definitely need a change.
OK. And Richard, what do you think?
Look, I think his position's OK.
OK.
And the fact he should be judged on his job as a diplomat rather than what he's done in the past. He's coming up against probably one of the greatest sledges the world's ever seen in Donald Trump. And I don't think that it hurts for him to throw a bit back every now and then. He's there for us. So he's there to stand up for Australia. He's not there to be a lapdog for America. So I'd rather him stand up and say what he wants to say than just go along with the flow.
What do you think about that, Darren?
Well, look, I think what's interesting with Kevin, he's such a, frankly, ruthless and gifted networker that he will be forming relationships in the US with the UN, with all people on all sides. He has a very deep knowledge of China. He won't be resting on his laurels. He will be pursuing this job in the national interest.
But as Rob said, do you think, though, his ego is going to get in the way here?
I think it's a contest of big egos everywhere you look, whether it's Trump, whether it's Rudd. There's no shortage in domestic politics either. It's tips and icebergs. You have to know when to be public in what you say and when to keep your opinions to yourself. I just don't think you'll see any more diplomatic waves from Kevin, and he'll get the job done.
Garth, what do you think?
Just for this tiny little issue of a thing called the media, which he cannot keep out of. I'm sure he's very good at working groups, and obviously to get his way to Prime Minister from Queensland, it's an incredible job within the Labor Party. The problem is you put a camera in front of him, he feels he has to dominate. He has to say whatever he needs to say in that moment, the little flicker in his head. Julia Gillard is the perfect example of someone who can show that restraint, who can have the dignity, the gravitas, the statesman-like presence to get that job done. Unfortunately, Kevin doesn't have it, and I don't see that changing.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd have to concede, though, Darren, he's a very poor former Prime Minister.
I don't accept that. No. I think, look, I worked for Julia, but I don't think they should have replaced Kevin in the way they did when they did, to be brutally honest with you. I think it caused problems for Labor in government that probably shortened... It certainly meant we didn't get majority government in the second term, and by going into minority, that was the end of the government. So, look, I think Kevin did some really good things, but he also made some enemies.
Yeah. All right, well, look, you've both had your say. It is now time to call on the jury. Jurors, you have 10 seconds to decide, can Kevin Rudd continue as our US ambassador? Jury members, what have you decided? OK, 2 of you say yes. The rest of you believe that no, his position is not tenable. Susan, why yes?
Well, nobody's spoken about what if Biden gets in.
Fair point.
I don't think he'll move, and Albanese's his friend. He won't want him to come home, and Biden will have no problem with him at all.
Yeah.
So if he keeps quiet and does the job, instead of voicing, he won't have to voice his opinion, really, because he'll be with Biden, the Democrat, and Albanese supporting him.
Annalisa, you said no. Why?
Yeah, now more than ever, we've got really perilous times. I think it was outlined really well that we've got a number of fronts moving at the same time globally. We need strength. He wasn't able to be professional or diplomatic, which is a key component of that job description. So I dare say that's where I sit.
Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think his position is tenable anymore. I think after those comments, they always come back to haunt you like they have.
Yeah, clearly that's what we've seen this week. Rachel, you voted yes. Why?
I actually thought no when I first came in, but the arguments actually swayed me the other way. He does have a very keen sense of and understanding of China, which we need to have. He does have that ego that can stand up to another formidable ego. So whether he can balance his professionalism with that, but I think he's got some merit to stay in the position. Whether that lasts, it's up to him.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Dani, you were just shaking your head there in the back row. You disagree?
Oh, absolutely. It's a sales job for Australia, and I just think, there's too much personality and politics going on. At the end of the day, he's there to sell Australia, and I just don't think he's doing that.
Yeah. What do you think of that, that he's not there, he's not selling Australia, he hasn't sold that brand?
Absolutely, perfectly the point. It's not there about Kevin. I know that's hard for Kevin because everything is about Kevin in Kevin's world. But he's not there for himself. He's there for Australia. We don't need to know, we need to hear about him. In fact, it's probably like a referee. If the game goes well, you don't see the referee, you don't think about them, don't hear about them. If he's doing his job, trade, commerce, defence, it's all happening. And you don't need to hear from Kevin whatsoever.
All right, fascinating. Did you want to say the final word?
I think things are moving well. AUKUS is developing well. There are other parts of trade and other elements of diplomacy that are working well. I think if you isolate, is Kevin doing a good job right now? The answer is yes.
Yeah. OK, well, look, remains to be seen. We'll see if Trump gets in first and then we'll have this conversation again. Garth Hamilton, Darren Barnett, great to speak with you both. Thanks for joining us on the panel.